All right, and at this time, we're going to welcome Rachel Rosenkrantz.
Hi everybody, thank you for being here tonight. Is that okay for you?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Yes.
So my name is Rachel Rosenkrantz, and I'm a luthier, but I started as an industrial designer, and I work mostly with engineers most of my life, so I feel like this room is filled with musicians and engineers. I feel like they're my people, so I feel like I'm already in good company. But I'm not alone tonight. My friend Ryan Rooney is going to perform some of the guitars that you see here, and also explain why this guitar has the headstock it has on that corner over there. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, I'm Ryan Rooney. I'm a multi-instrumentalist, guitarist, sound engineer, tinkerer of things, noisemaker. So with this instrument right here, this is a 9-string design. Basically, it's baritone strings on for the low, and then doubled up like a 12-string on the top. And I had this idea. I was in a recording studio, and we had this old guild that we sort of did the same thing to, but I've been playing lots of baritone. So as a soloist, I wanted to kind of have something where I could do bass and also, have some nice shimmer with the doubled up strings. So I jotted this design down on a napkin and gave it to Rachel, and then
Via text.
via text, it was literally a Sharpie on a napkin, and it looks exactly like that. It's exactly. I was like, yeah, it's sort of like that. It's exactly like that. So anyway, yeah, I'll give the mic back to Rachel.
All right, so where to start? By chronology, maybe? How did I ended up doing what I'm doing? There. All right, so that's back home. That's not, even though I'm based in Providence, that's not a Rhode Island accent. I'm from France. And this is me with my very first guitar and my little sister performing. So that's the guitar that kind of really changed my life. And I didn't know then. So I started to play classical guitar when I was about 8. And when I went to art school, I really liked architecture and industrial design. I was more drawn to applied art than fine art, even though I'm nothing against fine art. It holds a special place as well. But then I felt torn between being a musician or being a designer. And thinking that, they were always opposites, that there was no room for them to actually be combined. Until on maybe my, let's say, 3rd or 4th year at school, on my way to college, there was the Maurice Dupont Atelier Studios on Rue d'Aumigny in Paris, where I was waiting for my bus, and I saw in the windows progress every day. So his main studio is in the Jura, or near the Vosges mountain, but there's a studio in Paris. And I started to think, well, this is design and music together. Well, maybe there's actually like a discipline that combines my two passions. So one summer I stopped by and I asked somebody that worked there if they looked, if there was possibility for an apprenticeship or, and I've been told no, because I was too old. And at the time I was 21. I was like, what do you mean too old at 21? Back home, maybe more than here, I don't know, but I was explained then that a 21-year-old in a good art school should not take the spot of a 14-year-old that might not make it to high school, and that kid had the priority, which made sense and at the time, and kept on going on my studies, had less time to play music, and then music vanished from my life. And I worked in architecture firms, industrial design firms. I mean, I was still like listening to music and DJing here and there, But 10 years later, I really started to miss music. And all of a sudden, starting playing with bands, and not just one, it's suddenly like 5 rehearsals and practice a week, and just like playing all the time. And the idea of like building guitars came back again. So, but this time around, I found somebody, Daniel Collins, in the South County of Rhode Island, that said, okay, yeah, I'll give you an apprenticeship. And at the time, I was working with the Philips Electronics company as a designer in their innovation division and the lighting division specifically. And I was not ready to like just, I really wanted to quit my job. The cubicle world was totally like that was not for me. I just didn't know if maybe making guitars would be the way, but I wanted to try. So I asked the company if I could crossfade my 2 careers. I knew that I would build guitars. I've been daydreaming about it for too long to not do it. And that's what I did. And after 6 months, I'm like, I'm not gonna crossfade in 2 years, I'm done. Which was maybe a bit crazy of a decision. It takes a while to actually build a business. Looking back, I would have done the transition a bit smoother, but I don't regret it. And then I was building guitar every day, and I did share studios first with about 20 people and commuted pretty far in South County, then found someone locally. Anto D'Ambrosio was somebody I shared studio for a couple of years. Then he moved west. I learned a lot from just sharing a machine room, and we each had our own room, and in the middle we shared a lot of machinery. When he moved west, I acquired all his equipment and gave me a lot of the wood he had. So I was able actually to be completely independent and started my own business because of that. And I've been having my own wood shop since, and I've been building guitars every day for 10 years this summer. So yeah. So that's how I arrived here. Now I'm gonna go over some chronology of different things I've worked on, and now what I'm currently working on, and brought samples of different materials that I'm exploring right now. So maybe we can go through those a bit quickly. So I worked in architecture, but I was very fortunate that the architecture firm worked in residential, workspace, commercial space, like you name it. We were never bored. There was never one project that looked like the other. There was no routine. And that's something I really enjoyed there, that once I had my own practice, I tried to bring back. I really rarely build twice the same guitar. It's maybe because I just get bored easily. Started to work with wood, not so much during art school, but actually during industrial design, focusing on furniture. And I'm just gonna go through those a bit faster until we get to the guitar stuff. But so you have an idea of things I've done when I stopped playing music and gave up on the idea of building guitars. That's what I was up to. And I still use every day what I've learned during those years. So we were always about at Philips we're 1 designer per 8 engineers. And I've learned there things that I didn't learn at school, that only working day to day next to mechanical engineers. And that was a whole other education for me. So just to have a sense of what was the kind of work I did before. So during the daytime, that's what I was doing. While at nighttime, I was just with a chisel shaving cedar. And so it was a high contrast between this old world at night and innovative world during the day. And eventually, at one point over the years, they naturally started to overlap and meet. All right, this starts my very first build. Anyone has an idea of what kind of guitar that is? That model, by any chance? It's okay. Maybe, do you know?
Taurus?
Almost there. After that, the Hauser.
Oh, okay.
So I restarted was that's what I used to play musically when I was younger. Music was my first love. I'm gonna build really the instrument that helps me to reconnect, but also like a guitar like this will get you a lot of knowledge at once. I recommend if you do a first build to go over that blueprint. So like the last two are parlors, and I never saw a parlor until I moved into the US, I have to say. That's a very American thing. For me, that was like very new and exciting. But when I was also doing restoration and repairs, when I started my business, they started to pop up. Like somebody would drop one off saying, I found this in my grandfather's basement. And someone else, I found this in my grandmother's attic. And suddenly you started to see like parlors left and right, and for me that was just new, and they were definitely not new. But I really fell in love with that range, and that's actually most of the instruments I built are parlor size. The challenge of a parlor is how to get low end in such a small cubic volume, but it's also the fun challenge to actually find the factors that can compensate for that. This, if we go back 2 slides ago, this was trying to explore woods that were not necessarily like traditional tonal woods, and because a lot of woods species are endangered, and start to see woods that are overlooked that sound good too. So that was one of the first that I experimented with for that. The back and sides are in Kiat, which is more common now, but back then, like 9-10 years ago, that's not a wood you would find easily. It's better for short instrument because it's not a tree that's very large, but it's almost like a blonder mahogany if you manipulate it.
What's the name of it?
Kiat with 2A or 2T. Actually, if you Google both, you get both. But it makes a fruit that's not edible. So it's kind of a useless strawberry, but it has a structure that's very similar to mahogany. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then when I started to have commission work, I started to, once I knew where the guitars were ending, it already influenced my design on how the instrument should look like. This one is in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. It's not far from the Shaker Village, and Shaker furniture and Shaker design is very predominant still historically in that region. And I took some of those principles to apply it to that parlor. This was my first try at reuse. All the parts are from, there was one guitar that was from the 70s, there were some pickups that were from maybe the 80s, like you name it. The bodies from a humidor. Cigar box are too shallow. Humidor are a bit deeper, so you get actually some acoustic quality from a humidor more than a cigar box, even though they do the same job. And embedding also like a leather backpack to it instead of adding a strap, so the strap is already built into the instrument. Yes, so you have the bass and the guitar. Of course, you cannot play like this, just spinning it around unless you're ZZ Top. You're maybe too young to remember that move. But the idea is the bass is a drone. If that went to a blues player, so open tuning. So suddenly the bass, whatever you strum, is the drone for whatever you're gonna play on the guitar. So it didn't matter that the neck was not reachable for the bass. Skateboard bag. It was the only way to transport this one. So here you see, this guitar cost literally nothing. I didn't buy one part. Everything was entirely upcycled. The inlays are from bathroom tiles, little decorative tiles for in glass for backsplash. This guitar cost zero in material, and the materials are very reliable. So you can build a fun instrument on no budget. It doesn't have to be expensive to be good. It's just, then we can go to the next one. So very briefly, if you want to visit my studio, there's this video. I got the chance to be interviewed by Anthony Bourdain in 2016, and we walked through my studio and the process it takes to build a classical guitar. So if you're curious to visit my studio or how to build step-by-step a classical, I'll email you guys the link later. I'm not gonna make you sit through the whole thing. After playing with species of material, a species of wood, I started to think about maybe how to combine different types of instruments. So, there's like the archetype of how classical is braced, or an archetype of how a violin is made, and like, what if we mix it up? And this was an attempt at doing a hybrid of a violin, but the sides, the back is still carved. But as you see in the sound holes, you can see also they are very guitar-like feature. And to see if rosewood on a violin would work, and maybe to simplify the design and see if a hybrid structure would work. Was the challenge here. I want to build more of that. As I said earlier, I don't want to build more than one instrument, but that's an exception. So that was my first carved instrument, and I have to say, violins are really tough, also because they are very compact. I understand why they take more time, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to work larger. That'll be more comfortable. And here is the viola da gamba. And you can also pass it around. This was the first instrument where I used natural dyes. This is beet and cabbage, both for the blue, but also the pink. You change the pH of the juice you get, you reduce it, and by the pH, making it more or less, acid, playing with the acids, you can get bluer or warmer results. The tough part is to stabilize that after so it doesn't veer off again, but there are ways with varnish. And so I think now this one is maybe, it was 2017-18. So it's, the blue is turning a bit more to brown, but it's still pretty blue overall. But you can see that from up close later. I removed the O-rings. I used O-rings instead of movable frets, because I think I can find something better than neoprene. But the binding is actually in denim, because it will help to have friction to keep the movable frets in place. And just the front is actually printed Tyvek. Tyvek is meant to be resistant to friction. And I was using maple, and I thought that maybe this would be a fun, decorative way and durable way to protect the fretboard over time. The pattern is from my mom's hometown. It's the Toile de Jouy. It's very pastoral, late 1700s. You see that pattern on every wall in that region. So that's natural dyes. if you look at what you have in your kitchen, it's incredible how many colors you can already stain your woods with just what you have in your fridge. From mustard seed, turmeric, cabbage, beets. I mean, there's a ton. You can really get most of the spectrum just like in your cupboards already. And a little goes very far. That's mostly how pigments were done, even 500 years ago. You don't need to go that far. So there's a lot of answers just like right at home already. So yeah, you can see the movable threads. The neoprene was not hard enough. It was absorbing a bit too much, so I had to remove it.
Michelle, what material are the bath and studs?
Oh, that's maple.
Is it?
Yes, figured.
Spectacular.
Thank you. It looks like a Labrador back.
Yeah.
This event, it was the last time I saw you. And this was 3. God, time is elastic. 2018, Woodstock Luthier Showcase. That's drivable from where you are. Next time it happens again, I highly recommend it. You can see about 70 luthiers from the entire world showing their best work every year. Pre-pandemic. But that will come back again, and that's very drivable from here. The last one was celebrating women in the industry, specifically Linda Menzer, and that was the first time there were this many women participating at that event. All right, I wanted to take a break from guitars, so here, you guys recognize what that is, right?
No, they don't.
No? Yeah, you do. No? Hurdy-gurdy. All right, have you ever heard what's a hurdy-gurdy? Anyone in the room? I see some. Okay, so what's your definition of it?
The definition?
Yeah, like how would you describe it?
It just sounds like pirate music.
Pirate music? Okay, I could see that. Any other suggestion? So you see there's a crank, so it's a medieval instrument. So you can go back just a little bit. The one to the left is a lap size one, which is more traditional. That's a medieval instrument that appeared out of nowhere. We thought the oldest one was in France, and then the oldest one is in Ireland, but now the oldest one is in Spain, but they're all still, there's no predecessor to it. Just has keys, it's mechanical, it has a crank, it has a wheel, it has an axle, and there's no predecessor. It just suddenly, there's no Darwinism of instrument on this, on the hurdy-gurdy. So I was always very curious about it. And new medieval local composer, Steve Job, had won a grant to make a replica of a hurdy-gurdy that's 11 feet long. He was obsessed with Jeronimus Bosch and the triptych of, the Garden of Earthly Delights. And on the panel of Hell, there's lots of giant instruments. So Hell is gonna be okay. There's a giant oud, there's a giant harp, what else there is? There's a giant hurdy-gurdy, and based on the size of the characters in the painting, came the reverse engineering of the instrument. It's in the Guinness Book of Records as the biggest hurdy-gurdy in the world, and it sounds like the end of the world. So, if we can listen to it, I will explain the 3 cranks. There's a whole opera where this is performed called Mélusine in 5 acts. It's online if you have some time. It's one of the characters, that's why it has its boar head. The boar head was carved by a violin maker, McCarden, in Providence. So the 3 cranks, the one that's to the right is called the trumpet. It has a rattling bridge, and that's this kind of buzz you hear at every beat. So that's the rhythm. The axle in the middle is connected to the chanter, which changes the pitch. Those sticks are no different than your fingers. That's just what it does. It's exactly what your finger, it's just giant fingers. And the one we don't see in the video being turned is a drone, which is just a constant bass. And so you have bass, melody, and rhythm, all the 3 together in one machine. That was starting to make me look at instruments that are not necessarily just a guitar, and start to really be more interested in also instruments that are prior to the guitar. And I think that's, I needed this to start to expand my landscape and start to be more curious about other instruments. And this is guitar accessories. So as I was finishing working on the giant hurdy-gurdy, the guitarist Kaki King was playing in town in Providence, and I went to see her, and I realized that her VJ, a visual projection, person, used to be my VJ when I used to DJ. I don't know if all those acronyms make sense to everybody, but so she introduced us and said, "Oh, you girls should meet each other," and within 40 minutes, we decided that we should design things together indeed, and she was right. And she plays with a stick in her guitar on the 16th frets. And you've seen that probably also with pencils, or what's the name of that band that use screwdriver with Leonardo, what's the, something youth.
I don't know.
Anyway, so I see all those, a lot of people playing that way, but not really a proper device for that. So then you say, okay, you put a pencil under the 16th fret for a minute and 2, but that's it, you make some noise, you don't. But if you have something that's durable, where you can actually spend time and compose without damaging your guitar, then maybe it's worth exploring. And this is how Passerelle in bronze was made. The first one were in wood, they started to crack, and for me, for the making, it didn't make sense. I had to route them, then chamfer them, then oil them, but then they would dry out, and it was just, you cast it in one shot. Bronze is soft enough to transmit the sound, but it's hard enough that it's not gonna last a year or 2. Especially the hair is thin, and this hole, it's like a bridge. I mean, passerelle means bridge in France, in French. So actually with a minimal material, you're actually doing a lot of resistance. And this has been now a couple of years. There's a base version. You're welcome to try it after if you want. And the hardest part, it looks very simple, but was to find what's the common denominator amongst the most common guitars for the string spacing, the radius of the nut, and what's the most common arch of the radius of fingerboards at the 16th fret, and how wide are they, and if it's on a classical, what gauge should it be in case it was so many factors that we had to really boil it down to the measurements that would make most sense for most people. So it might not work perfectly for your instruments. Your instrument is very special, but if it's more of a common instrument, then it should work. And then we can hear a little bit of it, so you have a sense. The idea here, what the advantage of that does, so it's unlike a capo that press on the string, it's lifting it up. So if you put that accessory on different harmonic spots, then your left side and right side, they work in simpatico. And if you do an open tuning, then you have 12 notes that work together. You don't need to press down with a fret logic anymore. On an acoustic instrument, and I mean that's true also for an electric, you have one side that's louder than the other because one is, connected to the body, whereas the other one is connected to the neck. But what it is interesting with that default is that you can start to create dynamics between both sides. And here's a performance of it. Also, when you have time and you want to hear how I work 3D and how I use CAD and 3D modeling on my design process, there's also a short documentary from Autodesk on that. I'm not going to make you watch it like right here, but how I use CAD a lot in my drafting. I always sketch by hand first, full scale. This is the human factor we're working with. So unless it's for conceptual sketching and ideations, a notebook is fine. But when you really need to feel if your idea is tangible, it has to be scale 1:1. It's like I never repeat it enough to my students. It's just like 1:1 is the key. But once I'm there, I move to 3D modeling. I'm not gonna just wing it and guess on 3D modeling. I need something tangible first. I know the ergonomics are gonna work first, then I bring that into 3D modeling. Something I do also in 3D modeling because of my lighting industrial designer past, I use actually softwares of lighting projection and how light travels through a reflector or different designs on my guitars because light and sound travel similarly. And I use my lighting designer mind to sometimes really help myself with guessing how the sound on an instrument or an accessory will also travel. Try to see if that was grammatically correct. But yes, basically I use all my lighting tools to use them for sound because they're not that far off from one another. All right, bioleather. How we go from the bronze bridge to bioleather, right? I mentioned I had students, so I teach at the Rhode Island School of Design for the last 7 years. And I teach foundation years. So I introduce material property and basic structures. Like if you're going to architecture, sculpture, furniture design, or ID, you have to take my class before you get in your major. And there's this place for the last 80 years called the RATLab that Edna Lawrence 80 years ago, decided to have at school, which is a library of natural specimen. It started with a shelf, started with a room, and now it's a whole building. And we have taxidermy birds, butterfly, bugs, sea creatures. We have all the rocks, you name them. We just have also a huge microscopic room, and everybody can study, you name it. It's like bone structure for architecture, like loads, to printmaking, patterns that occurs in nature, and the iridescence of butterflies, how they can make color without actually dye. It's the most used resource there is on campus, and it's a candy store, and I spend a lot of time there. And in the basement, it's like a chemistry lab of making our own materials. Biomaterials, they've always existed. I mean, it's like Neolithic, even older than that. We've been around biomaterials, but it's been a good 10, 15 years that they start to be popular again, because we try to live a less toxic life, and actually you can make plastic with natural ingredients, and trying to be more cautious about, what we produce. And maybe naturally there are things that are as good, if not better, than what's, just manufactured. Or there's maybe a clever way to do it. And bioleather was my first test. So biomaterials are used a lot in the fashion industry, in the packaging industry so far, but not so much in acoustic properties. So I really wanted to start to explore that. And I just brought you the early test of kombucha leather. Basically, I got myself a fish tank, 100 bags of tea, and lots of patience. But in a month, you can obtain really this one is very beef jerky. That was my first one. Second one, this was maybe my fifth one. But you can see those starts to be very brittle. They don't have collagen. So then it's like with other ingredients, every batch you change and modify the recipe. And then you can, after 11 recipe, you can actually obtain something that start to be tangible. It's very sensitive to humidity, but this one starts to be already more flexible. But to really resist to the pressure of a banjo, I'm almost there, but not completely there yet. One option is to be as is, but the bridge is mostly resting on the rim and still some contact with the skin, so it gets some of the vibration are transmitted, but not all the weight. That could be one way. The other way is to actually grow multiple of those at the same time. Laser cut patterns of the other one's almost like a spider web. Superpose them while they are still not dry. Diffuse. And then you have already a built-in bracing system that can reinforce the structure. I'm happy to share my recipes. By the way, at the end, I also share the different libraries that exist online that I'm also refer to a lot. Especially one in Barcelona. There's now a school of biomaterials that's very interesting, and they open source all their recipes. I will encourage you to check them out. And so yes, I'm almost there with the banjo. The small one worked pretty well. So I happen to have a Turkish banjo from the 50s, which is all spun aluminum, all in one shot. And that tension was okay to manage. Scaled up, it's a whole other beast. But yeah, a couple more, and we should be good. But it takes time. There's a year basically between those two. Then this is oh, it's alive. I got the chance just before the pandemic to give a talk at the Metropolitan Museum about the Hauser guitar that you saw the model of earlier, but that was more about the history of it. And I just want to put it out there because that was the happiest day. All right, mycelium. I don't know if you know this, but fungi or fungi, like I know both are pronounced, are very popular lately. If it's in like Netflix documentaries or, I mean, you name it, there's not a day where we don't talk about mushrooms. That's not why I'm doing this. I was already like doing that, but it's interesting that the whole world is also picking up on that. At the same time as designers are exploring this material. Which, honestly, at first it looks like a granola bar. So this is not mushroom. If I pass it around, I was doing some dye test. Actually, I'm going to pass it around if you guys want. Okay. 80% of that is mushroom dehydrated. The rest is just corn husk, just to like hold things together. That takes like maybe 3 days, 4 days to grow. I mean, this is grown. This took me 3 days to grow in the mold, and 2 other days outside of the mold just to get some of the brie fizz, the brie crust fizz. It looks like almost MDF, very rough particle board, but it is mostly mushroom. When it's not in its dried up state, when you don't like put it yet in your oven, because that's how you have to bake it in the oven to stop the growth. It is completely rubbery. It is entirely very slimy, like as if you just cooked a mushroom in your pan with some butter. That sliminess, it is like this before it goes in the oven, which makes it very hard to make sure that suddenly the neck pocket is not sliding off, because this is completely like dancing free range. And this, I changed the recipe a lot to really make it hard. But as you see, I have a through neck on this application because I can snap. The fibers are not continuous. So the through neck will actually be what's gonna take all the tension. And it has to be a through neck that can really be built to not bow too much, given how much force is gonna be applied to. To protect it, I'm also working on an exoskeleton that's very light, with some perforation, so we still get to see the agro-brutalism result we have, which I don't mind. There's it's raw, literally and figuratively. I'm okay with that. There's something very honest about what it's made out of. I don't want to hide it. But I've been also looking at, and what if there could be a guitar that's with no wood at all. I started to work with through necks in wood, and I looked into paper, and I'm going to pass that around. So paper can be as tough as wood if it's pressed. There are some companies in like kitchen counter making that do decent ones. And this is also used lately in, I would say, in like maybe 10 years as a substitute for ebony for fingerboards. I can also pass it on. And so there are different companies that do that, but I've been using now a company that also is greener in their resin, in which they bind paper together. I've done some stress test. It's promising to actually be used as a neck itself. And it glues just like wood. It glues really well in itself. I try to budge and remove that little piece of that I cut here to glue it here. I still cannot remove them. Yeah. The challenge here is that when something is too rigid, is how it doesn't shatter. Because if it becomes close to glass, that's also a problem. So why mushroom? So the application of mushroom is mostly, at first, a packaging replacement for polystyrene. And I remember that polystyrene carries sound really well. I remember cellos made out of polystyrene in the 90s. I remember also some of my students building a foam core, one of their marimba, and it resonated even more than in wood. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I said, oh yeah, it's full of air. Sounds like air. And I'm like, well, if this is nature's polystyrene, that maybe this will also conduct sound. And it turns out it does. So if the sound is applied on it, it absorbs it. But if the sound is diffused from within, and it actually amplifies. And that's when I did a quick test of a ukulele. I realized that the first iteration of the bridge, it was completely dampening it. And when I use a tweeter of a speaker in it, I'm like, but it works. It's loud. But when I play it, it was not. As soon as I put on that bridge 2 teeth, like Dracula, and I just like planted like this little vampire bridge in it, suddenly it was much louder. So it's making sure that actually the sound source is completely embedded in the material and not applied on the material. Actually, this is the guitar where I used fish skin for the first time. I can pass it around. Lucky, like the customer brought it this week for just a little maintenance, so you happen to have it. That again, that's the key wood I mentioned earlier. That's another application of it. So try to scratch your nails on the pick guard. Just like go at it. Do you have nails? Yeah. Harder. Yeah. Actually, you can pass around. It's raw version, where you can see what it's.
Stingray skin.
It's not heavier than, and you can sand it smoother. Like you can put in drum sanders, double sticky tape on plywood, drum sander, and because there are bumps actually naturally the Stingray. So I saw that on the handle of samurai swords for grip. I'm like, oh my god, this is beautiful and it's tough. Let me look at this a bit closer. It's very flexible. So unlike the plastic, it actually follows the movement of the wood according to the season when it contracts and expands. Because if you try to pull a bit the material on the edge between the scales, it will actually move. So you don't get that stress crack sometimes that you have after 15 years on an instrument vertically on the soundboard, just underneath the pick guard, because it's a fight. It's really like an arm wrestling between the pick guard and the soundboard at that spot. It is. But the thing is, also, people will like spend a lot of money on beautiful exotic wood and for beautiful guitar, and at the end, boom, piece of plastic. Like it's like, really? And like this much effort to just like put some 3M and a piece of acetate. It's like, we can do better than that. So yeah, it's not heavier. I was afraid it will be too dampening, but you can really shave it very thin that it doesn't affect too much the sound. And I've been using it non-stop since. I've tried stingray fish from different countries. Italy still, they know their leather. So I source it from Italy. And another fish I'm using lately is tilapia. So this actually would be too absorbent. So you'll feel for on the instrument itself, but I'm working on guitar straps with it. It has a nice strength to it. It's very soft.
Wow.
This is also organic dyes. And usually tilapia skin is trash. It's already a fish that's kind of a farm trash fish. It's not really a fish. It's fed with trash, and it's an artificial fish that we created, and it's only living in farm, and their skin is thrown away. But I mean, it's true. Like look on internet, tilapia farms. It's scary. It really is. Just it's some better fish, but the skin is amazing.
It's pretty.
I wonder sometimes also like mandolin players, they always have those bibs for like not having like their instrument slide on their chest. Yeah. I wonder if like a backing of
Tilapia
a mandolin
bib.
Fish will give some Velcro effect.
Oh yeah.
Or like something you can snap on your instrument so it doesn't slide off. Yeah, see, just like that. We have a new idea together. And
What's this one?
so you see also fish on Ryan's guitar. So I've known Ryan for 17 years now?
Something like
Something
that.
like that. And I think you've played pretty much like every time there's a guitar event, you play my guitars. We've played music together. It's like, I mean, yeah. And yeah, so one day Ryan sent me a sketch on a napkin on a text. And it made sense that would be his guitar. Knowing how he plays, there was no other way that it had to be that. And I'm going to take a break from the presentation and let Ryan perform on the instrument.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit first. So this was I guess a collab. You can see the stingray leather, right?
Yes.
On this one. I just think it's so beautiful.
There's no shagreen.
I want you to hear it acoustically a little bit first, just for the demonstration purposes. I have been playing this in C, natural C fifth tuning, and sort of play bass at the low. But my original intent was to be able to do some more open tunings, and also be able to plug in electrically. So I'm going to give you the range of the pickups. There's 2 pickups in here. And that's just through the DI, through the mic, and then
one of the pickups is obviously at the end of the fingerboard, like you see. The other one is inside the guitar.
anyway, I'll play this little piece. That was the first piece that I wrote on this instrument. It's so I've had this for about a year now, so it's taken me some time to really adapt a style of how to play this. So I think I have about 2 definitive styles of playing this machine, I like to call it. One is as a soloist, which I'm not doing now. It does take a bit of time to tune. So when it's in natural, I just thump the bass and, can play with any band. I'm really happy with how it turned out, especially after a napkin drilling,
It's nice to hear it after a year.
It is. So I do a lot of film and podcast composition, and as I was explaining in our pizza party earlier, that the best thing about having this instrument for me is I'm a recording engineer, producer, and musician. I have a rack of guitars, probably like most of you do at home. So pick up a bass and do a track, pick up an acoustic and do a track, pick up an electric, pick up something else. And with this, I can really lay down a bass line, lay down a rhythm line, put down a melody, and have, without getting out of the chair. If you're lazy like me, it's very. Well, that was really it for that piece of music there. Do you guys have any questions that I can address? Okay. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to play it as well, you're more than welcome to give it a go. We can tune it however we want afterwards too.
Thank you. Honeycomb. I know, that sounds like why a honeycomb and a guitar. I had a student who's a beekeeper who really wanted to start a beekeeping club at RISD, and squeaky wheel got the grease, he got it. And at one point he asked me, it was my student 5 years prior that request, and said, I need to do an independent study with you about my beekeeping. I don't know anything about bees. What are you talking about? And I said, yeah. For my thesis, I'm redesigning the beehive, so we can listen to them without having to open the hive in winter so they don't die. Just because checking on them is already dangerous for them. Just like even a snowy day, you don't check on your hive, just that it's always 85 degree inside a hive. And they have to maintain that temperature inside. On a day that's 0 degree, don't do that. But how do you know if they're good or not? And his idea was, well, if we know what kind of frequency they're humming at, we know if they are queenless or not. If we know if it's loud enough, then there are still a lot of bees. If they were a smaller population, it will be less of a volume. We know that also if the sound is low in the hive and not high up in the hive, where the location of the sound is, we know if they are running out of food or not. Bees will eat bottom up. So the higher up the buzz, the sooner you know, okay, they're gonna run out of food, we need to do something. The winter is not over. And so I'm okay, so it's well, I need your acoustic knowledge to help me figure out that aspect. I'm great. Say, I don't know anything about bees. He gave me 2 beekeeper Bibles. Then one is Bee Democracy. It's fantastic. And I was always scared of bees, and after reading those books, and I want to be a beekeeper, I bought myself 6,000 bees, a whole little colony, and I built my own beehive, and off we go. And as he was working on his project, I noticed that a lot of things about bees and beehives also are reminiscent of the guitar. I built a top bar design, so it's not a Langstroth. If you're a beekeeper, you know what it is. If you don't know, the Langstroth is a design that was born in Philadelphia in the 20s. That's still the standard. And it's those cabinet file looking stacking ones you see. That's on a frame. But the predecessor, which is called also the geriatric hive, because you don't need to carry and stack up and lift those heavy things. It's just a trunk that you open that's perfectly at hand height. That's what I built for myself. And the bars of that hive, they're bars, they're not frames. So the comb is doing what naturally it needs to do and what the bees want it to be and not necessarily cornered. And often in the frame, you notice the bee don't build the comb all the way to the corners because the comb needs to vibrate. That's how they communicate. That all their humming, that's their phone line. That's how they actually talk. And the frequency is 309 hertz, 309. So 309, that's in the guitar range. And I was thinking, wait, those bars, the profile of them look like the bracing on a guitar. And that frequency is part of the frequency of the guitar. So are you telling me that if I put like honeycombs on those parts of the guitar, it will actually amplify? I was not sure, so I tested a bunch of combs and realized that's no speaker. Oh, I don't know it's a Bluetooth speaker, but I don't know what's my playlist right now anymore because it kept playing while I'm having pizza. Let me just. So this is, you probably know what that is. This is like a tweeter of a speaker. So if we put it in touch with different materials, it helps to hear how it resonates. So if I play classical guitar on this, I can test some cedar pieces of wood and see how they potentially can sound before I even put the bridge on. So that's very helpful for me to evaluate the instruments even before they're done. But let's see, is it Bluetooth should be on? Ah, it's off here. 70s thing, right? So I just want you to feel how much it's actually shaking the comb. So just a vibration, not yet the amplification, but just a vibration, and that's already a good indicator about how much it can make sound once put through an instrument. I could not bring the instrument itself today because it's currently at the RISD Museum. We'll have it back next week. If you're curious and you're in Providence, stop by this week. It's on the second floor. But yeah, you can feel really the vibration of it. So it sounds like a harpsichord, I have to say. The front, also something that was reminiscent of the guitar, the honeycomb, if you overlay the Nomex, which is another alternative to bracing. You can sandwich two soundboard and not have to brace as much, and the soundboard will be stiff. Which, leaving the guitar for a year and a half in a hive in New England and knowing how the wood can behave, this actually totally saved the day. My soundboard is flat after a year and a half in a sweaty hive in the middle of winter. And that's just because of this. And if you try to press this material, you understand why. It's paper coated with fire retardant material, and if you look at some furniture packaging, there are cardboards that are built with not the sea flute, not like the grain cardboard, but more of a honeycomb cardboard. This is extremely robust. And it's overlapped with the comb. It's exactly the scale of what the bees are building. So that was actually how I tricked the bees to start to build a guitar, because they have their own egress code. there's an amount of spacing between combs, like how many bees can go through that, and they have their traffic system. You cannot. So the spacing you will see of the bracing is kind of nuts. But the Nomex helped me to trick them into. I did coat it with beeswax, and they started to build the combs also out of the Nomex because they thought they were already being pre-built. And they said there's already wax on it. It's already that shape. And that helped them to be tricked into it. I left some parts visible through the sound hole just to show that Nomex was there, otherwise you would not know. And so I coated everything in beeswax. I started to use like some sheets of beeswax to start to, be in an array. This is the distance that I was talking about, that if I exceeded that, they would have filled everything in between. So it sounds like an overkill, but that's what the bees could build without, that was a blueprint for the bees, egress, basically. That's the beehive I was telling you about, and those are the bars you see on top. You can turn it off too if it's like no one uses it. Yeah, no, it's like French pop from the 80s, I can recognize. Here we see the bees building inside the hive, some of the combs. I was really shocked to see how quickly they filled up the combs. I thought, they're gonna build it, I'm gonna take it out, and they're gonna have more frames to build, more bars to build, and they will be fine. There's another half of the summer. They were filling, as they were building the comb, much faster than I anticipated. So I had to leave them for a whole other over winter, so they could eat it, so they can clean it, so it was empty again, because I was not scooping out one by one. So that's the day I took it out, and I thought it was ready. They didn't build it entirely, and that's because I underestimated the cubic volume I left. It was too spacious, really, for the size of the colonies, so they stopped building when they felt they were fine. So we're good, not gonna work more. But it actually worked out in my favor because I had space to also build around this. So that's back at the studio, trying to drain as much as I could some of the honey out of it because it's heavy, it's attracting some other bugs, it becomes an open bar for mice. I mean, you have to really take care of that pretty quick, and sometimes gravity is just much better than, Yeah. And you see, I removed the heavy combs, I removed them. So I had to edit and keep really what was essential. And when it came down to do the finish, and I don't want to, I couldn't sand down their propolis, the honey that dried out. And actually, so propolis is what they build into any cracks and to protect from bacteria, to keep the hive hygiene impeccable. They actually glued for me what was already starting to be damaged on the sound hole, because the propolis, I don't need to glue this. The propolis already did it. So that felt pretty. I was not expecting that. I didn't anticipate that. So I left it completely as is. I did add a coat of beeswax in the front, but that's pretty much it. I did file a bit on the edge here, you can see, just for a bit of a chamfer. Some parts where it was easy to get splinters. And now it's like talking heads. There's an off button on the side. But the comb is so exposed that you cannot really play it without damaging it. And my solution for it was to build a body, leaving the comb exposed, but to have a shield that will wrap around your rib cage that will prevent you from bumping into the combs. It's still very fragile. You know, I won't travel far with this guitar. I would be afraid that even the vibration of the car could damage them. But I have also a high-res 3D scan of it, so if someday something happens, well, no, it's biodegradable. Eventually, this guitar will be, you know, just the beeswax will not be there. But I have also like a high-res 3D scan, so I could print it in beeswax again, 3D print it in beeswax. And I'm looking into also how in taxidermia they preserve those, because they are old honeycombs that are still like in good shape. So there are ways. So yeah, you see the sweeping structure that goes around your rib cage to prevent you like knocking the combs while you play. This one, I apologize. I felt the whole time like I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm missing something. That's the one I forgot to bring. So it's something I started 4 years ago, and then I put it on the side because it drove me crazy. It was very frustrating. It's the resonator is looking too much like a pasta strainer, and I was annoyed by that. And I wanted to look at other solution than that pasta strainer look. And why is it in metal? Okay, there's a reason why, but I'm like, you know, when I do my dishes, the bowls are resonating pretty well too. Maybe there's something to ceramic. And again, the nature lab at school, I started to look at bones, and I was not thinking about this project. I just happened to have my students there, and that's when I looked at bones and how bones and ceramic are very similar. I'm like, well, what if the resonator is its own skeleton? And what was very hard was to try to mold it to slip cast a shape like this. Then to 3D print it in plastic, that was not hard, but once in ceramic, it was almost impossible because it had to have extra supportive material, but that was too top heavy for that to happen. But a couple years later, the technology is now actually feasible because you have those like powders that you can actually like burn and rigidify as it goes up and doesn't need the support system that technology couldn't do before. The bottom part doesn't work yet, but the shoulder part, I already have that figured out. I'm gonna, the shape you see on the shoulders, the two sound holes, with this kind of like trumpety flaring out shape are actually based on the ear structure, but reversed. I'm trying to see if there's even a ceramic that can be a bit closer to like some cement. So I'm thinking also of not only let me retry that phrase. 1, 2, 3. Basically, it's just an all open air guitar. It's the only part that would be covered is the lower bout. Right now, the top part doesn't need to be covered. So I apologize, I forgot to bring that part. I felt terrible. But I can, you're not far, I can come back again. So this one is somewhere in between Belgium and DC. It was on a traveling tour. It's not here yet, but once I have it back, I'll be happy to stop by with the ceramic and show you that. What did you guys do during your lockdown? I ate a lot of eggs, so I saved the eggs and I crushed them. And no, but there's a furniture technique that you find in Southeast Asia and also some parts of Europe that use eggshell crushed and gold leaf and lacquer, especially urushi lacquer. And I wanted to try that technique for a while, but then I realized that actually eggs are, calcium has some resonance in varnishes, especially in violin varnishes, I mean, this is like really encrusted. That's really for the aesthetic of it. But if you look at the sound holes, this is semi-hollow. The interior is gold leafed, and that's to help also project the sound more. And I have to say, just that very thin micron, thinner than hair thin layer of gold inside was a game changer. Sound-wise, it reflects light. It also reflects sound. The back plate, you see there's a USB port. I don't know about you, but when you run out of 9-volt battery, or you're on the road on a tour and you cannot find a 9-volt battery, or you realize the show is about to start and you scramble in your bag and you don't find it, now you can also charge it. I didn't invent that. It's not me. It's Fishman. But I was so thrilled to the idea of not disposing of batteries in the trash again and not having to buy batteries again. And you charge it overnight, and this guitar was able to be played for about a whole season before it's ran out of power. And in one evening you can charge it and be all set for a season. So it's actually pretty decent as far as the power it has. More details. So you see more the gold leaf inside. I think my favorite compliment was from my nephew. He's 6 years old, very much into dinosaurs, like every 6 years old, and asked my sister, "Do you think it's for me?" And she said, "What makes you think the guitar is for you?" I say, "Well, it kind of looks like a dinosaur skin, right?" like, okay, that's the ultimate compliment. And pretty much that's it. So I have yeah, it's funny that sometimes it takes 40 years to just go right back here, and what you do when you're a kid, stay in touch with it, because maybe that's what you're supposed to do anyway. Right. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have any, if it's about Ryan's playing, or if it's about my build, or if you have questions about some materials. I brought something I wanted to show you about 3D printing. There are 3D printing pans, so instead of just relying on the Z going up, I mean, you can do what the machine cannot do. And but I wanted to show you also filaments that. Because I know 3D printing is more and more popular and more affordable, but that's a lot of plastic. It's still like corn plastic, so that's okay. But this is a filament that's made out of sawdust. Sawdust collected. So it's half sawdust and half corn plastic. And the advantage of this one, it doesn't shrink when it pulls off, which is always the problem with the plastic one. It's a bit more crumbly, but I feel like they can be resolved. This just for one. But you see, it needs to be built very thick. The goal is to maybe try to build an instrument out of one giant spaghetti and interrupted. Yes. All right, questions?
So the honeycomb
Yes.
sample that we got with the driver, what is that? How are you applying?
So no, it was just I wanted to see if it would conduct the vibration. So like
this was before the honeycomb.
that was before the honeycomb, and I tried it with also hornets, paper wasp nest, and I thought it's like paper. It says gooey, because I thought like this is too gooey. It's absorbing a lot, but somehow the structure still like diffuses. The paper wasp didn't work as well, and I was actually very surprised because it's not nearly as like mushy. And this one is like probably like when it's that dark, that's a comb that's been many years in the same hive. So that's yeah, but it's really like transmit pretty well.
But that's made of beeswax.
That's 100% beeswax. That's the cells hasn't been filled.
So the guitar that you built with the
Yes.
beeswax sticking out in it, right?
Yes.
So how does it sound?
Actually, I did post it when I strummed it, when I finished strumming. Maybe
Or you don't have
I don't have it here, but it's not impossible to. I can link it from the page because I have it being strummed the day I strung it up. I did the 3D model scan, the 3D scanning, and now I'm like going to like have it recorded before it gets, lived in. A comb just falling off or. But that's the winter project, is to record a bunch of instruments because they go in their new home as soon as like they're ready, and then I'm like, oh, and they sound good like maybe 2 years after they're finished. But yeah, I still need to record that one.
Oh, that's true. I have lots of recordings of it, but they're all like. I did want to play this as a standard tuning sort of thing, so you can get the idea of the application of this guitar.
Do you see a hand in the back? Oh, I see one in the front. Yes.
So from start to finish, how long does it take to make a full guitar?
So I would say for this one, about 120 hours. For the honeycomb, almost 2 years. So it depends. The kombucha leather, right now it's been a year, but I feel it's close to it. So the thing is with biomaterials is we are kind of figuring out the materials as we do. So even if you have a design in mind, you have to wait for what the material can do to decide, because that's interlocked, the design decision and what the material properties are. They're completely attached to the hip. So, there's something I wanted to show you guys because I think you guys might be the perfect crowd. We have time to talk about this? This is a crude prototype, but I'm working on, since the mushroom absorbs in its natural state passively, it actually means the NRC, which is like noise reducing, the tiles for recording, the acoustic tiles. Now I want to turn it actively, since like injecting sound makes it diffuse. So this passively absorbs sound, actively diffuse sound. So your wall can turn into a speaker, and once the sound is not there, it's a sound absorbent. The next step, so speakers will be like in that pod, and now, which it is right now. And the second part is to put actively also noise canceller. So passively neutral, it's the NRC, standard. And it's a natural fire retardant, so that's also fireproof. Then actively, you can mute the room even more. Or actively, you can actually diffuse sound and hear sound. And you can now control tiles of stereo. Maybe the left side of the room has a different sound than the right side of the room. And that patterns allow some repetition in different directions, so you don't notice specifically the pattern. It's not just a copy-paste. You can actually move it around and be more organic about it. But also the draft, to release it out of the mold, is a degree that's maybe more drastic than it needed to be, but it allows me also to have them make turns and have curved walls instead of sharp corners. So I have to say, like right now, my struggle with this is to think about how to wire and maybe how much energy I should use when I have, like, let's say I grew 67 tiles for now, and past that wiring, I'm like, parallel series, how much amps per, and I'm just like, the more I think about it, the more it drives me crazy. But I feel like you guys can have the right brain power to maybe be be helpful on that. But yes.
Yes, you need an ECE student.
We got those.
Yeah.
That does-
Yeah.
What does ECE mean? Okay, well, yeah, that sounds exactly what it means. But yeah, I mean, if you want to learn how to grow mushroom, I mean, that's a very odd sentence to say in the context. Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming, for taking your time. If you want to look at some of the instruments from up close, materials from up close, if you want to try to gold leaf some wenge, because I brought everything for it, so you can go to town. Just if you manipulate the kombucha, don't stretch it too much. It's still pretty fragile. I leave it on its plastic container just to keep it in shape right now. Oh yeah, cork leather for bow quiver. It's shavings of cork laminated on fabric. And it says it's I've made a couple of quivers for bass bowing. That works pretty well. And hopla, so if you wanna. Cool, please.
Ryan is going to play us out, but feel free to come up, take a look around, and chat with Rochelle and others. Thank you.